You have to unmute. There you go. Well, take a deep breath. Are you ready for me to introduce you?
I don't think I've ever been more nervous in front of a crowd than I am in front of all my cousins. I have to tell you.
We are very intimidating, a very intimidating crowd. I shiver each time I have to stand before the congregation.
I don't think last time I was in front of this many cousins from Indianapolis was my bar mitzvah.
We're going to make that connection in a few moments. So it is 7:30. I'd like to welcome you all to our May cocktail Judaism. This is going to be our last session before a summer pause. So let me wish you all l'chaim, and let's hope that as the summer unfolds, we will be entering a more open season, and perhaps we can begin to think of opportunities of getting together in person, certainly by the fall. Tonight, we have a very, very special guest. I'm going to introduce him briefly and then ask him to say a few additional words about himself. First, I'd like to thank Jackie Goldstein, our communications director, who has arranged for the details of this evening's program in communication with Adam after we made the invitation. And of course, Sherry Levine, our executive director. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's program with Adam Brown. Adam is the administrator of the nonprofit Avotaino Dna Project. Avotenu means our ancestors, and it is an interdisciplinary academic study that is using the DNA samples from today's Jewish population to illuminate the origins and the migrations of the Jewish people over the last 3,000 years. The study has over 10,000 participants from every Jewish community known worldwide, from China to my relatives in Curacao, with a particular interest in locating the descendants of the victims of the Spanish expulsion in 1492. Tonight, Adam will discuss the historical, archaeological evidence describing early Jewish history and will illustrate how the Avotaynu Project has enabled its participants to connect themselves directly to our ancient Jewish past. Now, even though Adam is connecting with us from New Jersey, he has roots in Beth-El, and I would like to ask him before the formal presentation to tell us a little bit about those connections. After all, we are talking about genealogy tonight, right, Adam? So tell us about your Beth-El connections, including your relationship with my boss, Sherry Levine.
Well, I'm going to tell you, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I've actually redone my whole talk, and I'm going to start out talking about my connections to Indianapolis. How does that sound, Dennis?
That's why I asked you that as the first question.
Yeah, okay. But he wants to make it part of his talk.
Absolutely. Oh, so you want me to just let you integrate that into your...
Yeah, I'm going to integrate that in. And because I have some pictures and I see some of my cousins here. I see Marty and Sherry and Marcia, and a cousin and Andy Spector out in California. So I have some pictures of their family, and I'll going to share them with you if you guys don't.
How about if I just let you start and ask you that as Adam Brown breaks his connections with Beth-El, you also tell us a little bit about how the Avotayno Dna Project differs from the other typical ancestry programs. And over the phone, you explained to me in a very meaningful metaphor that it was like the difference of looking through binoculars and looking through the Hubble telescope. So begin with the immediacy of your family and take us through Jewish history in excursion of genomic genealogy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome to our program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be in Indianapolis virtually. I'd rather be there in person. But Bashana Haba Abba the Indy, okay? So, and I hope to celebrate another holiday. I used to celebrate all my holidays, all my Rosh Hashanahs in Indianapolis with my family, and haven't been able to do that in a number of years. But It's a great pleasure to have spent many high holidays listening to the Rabbi's Sasso talking about Torah.
So
And
this is payback time, huh?
and it's a small bit of payback, tiny bit. I could do this every year for the rest of my life, and I won't do what you've done for our family. So I appreciate it.
Sweet.
So I'm going to go over to my presentation. I want to mention to you, this is a 1.5 hour presentation, but being that this is cocktail hour, I'm going to do. I've greatly edited it. It's about a 20-minute talk because I'd rather hear from you guys your impressions, and I'm going to go through it quickly and meaningfully, and want to hear back from you. So let me just turn this on. Okay. Some of you this is the first time I was ever in Indianapolis. And that's me with my uncle Musty Weinstein at what was then Indianapolis International.
Oh my God.
I think there was only one gate. They just numbered it 4 just to impress visitors. But that was Musty and me, and I've been back many times. Everything I know about my father's family, I learned on a TWA cocktail napkin as we flew out to Indianapolis. He always felt sort of badly that he was going to thrust me into this crowd of cousins and not know who they are. So when I was about, my mother sold my house when I was about 40, and she said, there's something here I think you want. And it was a TWA cocktail napkin with all my cousins in it. The Regan stripes and the silvers and the golds and the whole crowd. And I'll actually give you a list of surnames just to show you how I'm really an Indianapolis kid. I was kidnapped. This is my grandmother, Sarah Wanger, of blessed memory, who came to Indianapolis in 1904 at the age of 10. And this is her about age 90, also in Indianapolis. And the intervening years she spent in Denver, Colorado. But she came back to Indy to live with Musty and Molly, and she was a regular on the scene for most of her life, and at least in her childhood, and in her old age. She lived at Hooverwood, and so I'm honoring her with this. These are the surnames. I sat down with my pad over lunch today, and these are all the surnames in my family. And if I missed any, you guys can send me an email, but I think I caught most of them. And they're both from my father's family, which was the Brown family. But the Regan Stripes married into our family. Married one of my grandfather's nieces, and of course Marty Lipp is here, and Shari, and the Levines, and the Zuckermans, Meltzer. These are all my family in Indianapolis. They're all part of our family. And on the right-hand side is the family that came in through my Uncle Musty, the Weinsteins, the Winstons, the Carabels. These are all old families. I have no idea how many of them still live in Indianapolis. I know Dick Leventhal is still there. I saw him a few years ago. And of course, the Davises, right? And the Wassermans and the Greenwalds. So these are all families that go back to the turn of the 20th century in Indianapolis, a century or more. And I remember when my cousin Rick married Rita Davis. She said, Davis. Oh, Davis. In 1904, when I came to America, your grandmother was my best friend. So that's the kind of history that exists in Indianapolis, and you don't find in very many places anymore in the world. And I've always appreciated that about the place. This is a picture of City Market, probably about 1934. And that's my grandfather's sister, Esther Kipp, who is Libby Fogel's mother. Okay, I don't know if any of you have been around town for more than a couple of years. You know who Libby Fogel was. Libby was my father's first cousin. And that's May Lockman, okay, whose daughters Joanne and Diane, who passed away recently, are my father's first. I guess they're my second cousins. This is Libby Fogel and my dad. Those of you know Libby, she was about 14, I think, in that picture. And she and my dad had a special relationship as teenagers that went all the way through their lives. They were very devoted to one another. First cousins. My father was the son of the oldest sibling, and Libby was the daughter of the youngest sibling. Some of you may know these guys. This is the Weinstein family. This is my Aunt Molly, my father's sister, and Lee, Phil, and Rick. And Rick was in Indianapolis till probably 4 or 5 years ago. Now he lives in Arizona. So I'm just establishing my bona fides with you guys, you know. Now this is this picture means something to Sherry. Hi, Hal. And this is Zish Regenstreif and Molly, who he married. It's my father's first cousin. And of course, here's David and Sandra. And this is my dad. And this is Molly's aunt. That's her mother, excuse me. That's Sarah. That's her Aunt Pearl. And that's her Aunt Esther. These are all Indianapolis families. And this is taken in 1947 at Phil Weinstein's bar mitzvah. Look at those dresses. Are those great? This is, if you ask me, what is my recollection of Indianapolis? It's as a kid, it was sitting around eating and talking with cousins. And there's Molly and there's Sandra, right, Sherry? And these are all cousins. There's Zish and David Fogel. So this was really, in fact, there's a funny story in my family that involves Marcia, which is that my Aunt Molly was constantly fixing my brother up with dates whenever he came to Indianapolis. And she fixed him with one young woman, and they go to a restaurant, and the date starts chatting up this lovely young girl. And the conversation goes on for about 5 or 10 minutes. She goes, "Wait a second. This is your cousin David Brown." And it was Marcia, okay? Marcia Regenstreif. So we didn't even know who all our relatives were. It took years to figure out how they all fit together. I had to do a genealogical table to figure it out. That's Molly and Musty Weinstein, former members of Beth-EL. Okay, that's the end of so now you guys, you've triangulated me. You know my latitude and longitude in Indianapolis, family-wise. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our ancient history and what we're trying to do to bring that ancient history up to the present, and how to make it very personal for all of you. So what this is a picture of is Europe about 3,500 years ago, 32 to 3,500 years ago. And it is a representation of where you would find tin and copper in those days. And tin and copper were essential elements for making bronze, which is an alloy which was essential to life in that period. That's 3,200 years ago. And you can see on this map that in the teal color, that is the availability, that is the places where you can find bronze. And these little orange dots are where you can find tin. So you can see that copper was quite available. I don't mean bronze. Copper was quite available, but tin was not. Tin was hard to find. So the island of Cyprus was basically a mountain of copper, and you had copper deposits all through Turkey and up through the Balkans. But tin you couldn't get. So the way they defended tin was through a tripartite group of empires. You had the Assyrians and the Hittites and the Egyptians, and they ruled the Middle East. Okay, they ruled it with an iron fist. There must have been 150 to 200 kingdoms within that realm. They were suppressed by these major kingdoms. They kept a lid on them because they wanted to have peaceful trade of tin. Tin was the petroleum of its day. Think of the world today. If you close the supply lines of petroleum from the Middle East to Asia, okay, or Europe, and you would think of the havoc that would cause. That's the havoc that would have been caused if these people had lost access to tin, because bronze was how you made implements of war, which was essential to the survival of your civilization, okay, from all the marauding bands who wandered back and forth throughout Asia. So this was the system, and you'll see that the Egyptians actually controlled the Holy Land, right? Palestine. The Levant was controlled by the Egyptians all through this period. So who lived during this period? Here's King Tut. Here's Ramses II. right? This was the period of the Israelites, right? When their sojourn in Egypt. The whole thing came to a crashing end. Okay, this whole system, which suppressed all these little kingdoms ruled by these four kingdoms, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Hittites, and the Mycenaeans, whole thing came crashing down very suddenly. And it reminds me a lot of sort of how perilous the world is today. And what do they think caused it? Internal dissent within the various empires. You know, empires don't last forever. Eventually they collapse through their own weight. It was done by, it may have been environmental collapse. Okay, we have evidence of that. There were invasions by asymmetrical warriors. You know, these were not standing armies. These were guerrilla raids by the sea from Greece. So these various things, some of which we're seeing today, people, you know, other environmental degradation, internal dissent within the major countries of the world, asymmetrical attacks from small bands of terrorists. I mean, these are the kinds of things that destabilize nations. And in 1200 BC, this whole thing came crashing down. Now, what arose from it? Well, we start finding these stela, these monuments dated between 800 BC and 1200 BC. These monuments that start talking about the house of David, and they start talking about the house of Israel, and they start talking about the God Yahweh, and they start talking about cities that we're familiar with, like Gaza and Ashkelon. Okay, what's going on here? And these are all, one of these is in the Louvre. This is the British Museum. This one is in the Israel Museum. This is not Hasbra. This is not Israeli Hasbra. These are archaeological finds found by famous non-Jewish archaeologists over the last 200 years in the Holy Land and in surrounding territories. And these are not written by our people. These are written by other kings and pharaohs talking about these pesky tribes to be found in the Levant. And so what do we find? We find after the collapse of these empires, something occurs that we're very familiar with. It was just like the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it was like the collapse of Yugoslavia. When you have a dictatorship that suppresses the aspirations of tribes and kingdoms, when that lid is lifted, suddenly they all burst into nationhood. And that's what happened in Yugoslavia, right? We had Bosnia and Macedonia and Slovenia, Slovakia, and Slovenia and Serbia, right? Croatia. So all these little countries, when the lid came off, burst into bloom. And the same thing happened after the collapse of the Bronze Age. When the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Hittites were laid low, up came the Israelites and the Judahites and Edom, right? Ammon, Moab. We know about all these from the Torah. So we're starting to see now you're starting to see archaeology and our own traditions coming into play. We start to understand what happened. Now, these little kingdoms couldn't really rule the Levant. They didn't have the capacity. They were. We know from the Torah that they were fighting with each other constantly, and so they could never defend themselves against foreign intruders. And one of the things about the Middle East is we were in the middle of a danger zone. We had enormously powerful kingdoms to the west. We had Egypt. We had enormously powerful kingdoms to the east, which is Assyria and Babylon. And they could never tolerate, you know, these weak little states in the center, okay, any more than we can tolerate having in Europe. Look in Europe. Look how quickly we rushed in to expand NATO into Central Europe when Russia collapsed, because we couldn't afford to have them loose, you know, subject to all kinds of mischief from the Soviet Union and other powers. So we rushed in to take possession of them. The same thing has happened throughout Jewish history, and we know about it from the Torah, but we also know about it from history. So up in the upper left-hand corner, we have Sennacherib, who was the ruler of Assyria, who came in and laid waste to the northern tribes. We know about him from our history. He stopped short at Jerusalem. He allowed the kingdom of Judah to remain, but he destroyed the nation to the north, the nation of Israel, the kingdom of Israel. And according to our tradition, he scattered them, you know, to the four winds, right? We lost all the 10 lost tribes. Okay, then we have to the right Nebuchadnezzar, Okay, he was the Babylonian king. He came in as part of this struggle with Egypt and Assyria. Then in the lower left-hand corner, we have Cyrus the Great. He came in for the same reasons. He conquered Babylon and restored the temple, or allowed the Jews to restore the temple. And then we have Alexander, who did the same thing. The road to Asia was through the Levant. So I'm not going to belabor this. There are a lot of wonderful books, and I have a copy of this hour-and-a-half talk is available online. I'll send you. I'm going to give you a link to it. But I just wanted you to understand that Jewish history is, we think it's all about us, but it was about a much bigger picture, which these countries weren't picking on us personally. They could not allow these little weak kingdoms of Judah and Israel to wander around on their own, and possibly falling into the hands of their enemies. Okay, so that's really what our biblical history is largely about. So in the end of this all, we end up being part of Rome. Okay, the bigger fish kept eating the littler fish, and when all was said and done, Rome was in control from Basra in Iraq all the way to Spain. And the Jewish people of today, we are indeed, our dispersion was not just, it was push and pull. There was both, a push, when we had trouble with the Romans in Second Temple times, and we were dispersed, but we had ventured forth from the Levant long before then. We're quite certain that the Jews had been traveling all across the Mediterranean with the Phoenicians hundreds of years before then. So there was a push and a pull. There was a push, but there was also a pull. And one of the things we know from Jewish history is that the pull of political and religious freedom and economic success is enormous. I mean, it pulled 2 million Jews to America between 1890 and 1920. That wasn't all about pogroms. It was largely about the Golden of Medina, the Golden Land. So when you look at Jewish history, you have to say, yes, we were pushed, but what led us to the place where we went? Okay, what took us there? And what took us to that specific place was the pull, which was the opportunity for freedom. And for Jews, that means both religious and economic. So here we have a representation of the collapse of Jewish life in the Roman Empire within the Levant. This is the famous Arch of Titus in Rome, okay, demonstrating the slaves in Rome carrying the ritual objects from the Second Temple, right, into Rome. We've lost all sight of them. We have no idea where they are today. Probably melted down by some conqueror of Rome. And this was the empire that followed, because Rome ultimately didn't last forever. It collapsed. We were left with Byzantium in the east, and of course the Arab caliphates, and we lived among the Berber tribesmen in the north and in Iberia, right? All the places where we had ventured among as Roman citizens, we were left behind as Rome collapsed and withdrew, okay? I don't want to lose you guys. I'm going to but the point of this is we were redeemed, okay? We're redeemed by a person we never talk about in much in Jewish history. And the man who redeemed us was named Charlemagne. And Charlemagne provided a lot of pull. So I've talked about the push. The push was the fact that Jews in the Byzantium lived a very difficult life, okay? The Visigoths in Spain were very hostile to Judaism. The Byzantines were very hostile to Judaism. Those are the early Greek Orthodox Christians. And the after the Muslim conquest, things were not always rosy in North Africa. We were second-class citizens. We had to pay a demi tax to the Muslim rulers. And Charlemagne offered something. He said, I want to settle my nation. And he invited the Jews into his domain, which was the Holy Roman Empire. And there is, in the center of this map of France, you'll see a river called the Rhone. And one of the aspects of Jewish history is we followed rivers. Rivers were our thing. That was the Interstate 80 and 90 of its day. There were no highways. There was no railroad. Travel over land was difficult. And if you wanted to follow Jews, they traveled by water. And to go from Palestine, Roman Palestine, to Iberia was not an impossible task. The Romans controlled the seas. There was peace in the Mediterranean. It was a Roman lake. To go from one end of the Mediterranean to the other was not a big deal. And that was also true of rivers. And so we traveled up the Rhone River and we did well. Okay, and we have genetic evidence. I'll go with you in a minute to show we did well. We then crossed over from the Rhone to the Rhine. And one of the things about the Rhine is the Rhine flows north, okay? Which means that all of our family that lived on the Rhone, that came out of the Mediterranean, that had been communicating with its families for 800, for hundreds of years, suddenly lost contact with them. They stopped, they had new rabbis, they had a new minchag, they had a new language called Yiddish, and they began to be described as something called the Ashkenazim. And that's who the Ashkenazim are simply a portion of the Jews of the Mediterranean who, at the invitation of Charlemagne, found their way up the Rhone, in my opinion. There may be other opinions, and who ultimately joined at the Rhine, and by virtue of being cut off from their Mediterranean roots, they reinvented themselves. Okay, they re-identified. And one of the things we know about Jewish history is the fluidity of our identity. Okay, if you were to ask me who were the great men of history, I'll tell you Abraham Lincoln and George Washington in terms of my personal understanding of the world. But certainly my grandmother, when she came here in 1904, hadn't the slightest idea. So in 50 years, I went from a Yiddish-speaking kid who knew all the great rabbis but knew nothing about world history to a guy who knows a lot about world history and very little about the great rabbis. Okay, so it's almost a complete turnaround in one or two generations. So I'm just making the point that there's great fluidity, and we found genetically that most people have no idea where they come from or who they are. They only know their current practice and maybe back one or two generations. So I'm going to speed through this. Now, the next thing occurred was the Black Death. Okay, think our current pandemic times 10. Okay, 30% of the population of Europe died in the Black Death. Think about that. 30% died in the Black Death, and it occurred in just a few years. And this is where the Jews lived in largely in Germany and northern France. They were wiped out by the riots that followed. So it wasn't just the Black Death that did it; it was the riots. It's possible there were fewer than 1,000 Ashkenazi Jews left in Europe after the Black Death. But again, we were redeemed. Okay, Casimir the Great invited the Jews into Lithuania, Poland, what we call the Pale today. And the Jews grew and multiplied greatly. This is the map. This is the spaghetti of Jewish origins. So how do we unwind this spaghetti? How do we have some understanding of who we are and as individuals? What is our role in all this? How do we unwind this history and make it personal to ourselves? So one of the things that I've been interested in since college over 45 years ago, is the uses of DNA. And we've seen a staggering use of DNA technology this year. It's saved us, in the creation of mRNA vaccines, right? It's a shocking and amazing thing that in less than a year we've been able to come up with a vaccine that prevents this deadly disease. And I'm immensely proud that Jews played a role in it at every step of the way of curing it. Now, this is a map of genetic variations. Now, some of you may recognize this map. This is a map of the genetic variations of the COVID virus. And this is a technology that looks at the entire COVID virus from one end to the other, and it looks for differences between them. So you're familiar with the variants, right? We know about the variants coming out of in Brazil, the variant in South Africa, right? There's a new variant in England, right? So we know that this virus is growing like crazy. And one of the things about it is that variations occur of when a cell multiplies. It's not a digital process, it's an analog process, and errors occur. Okay, so there are errors that occur, and you get new variations that inherit those errors from their ancestors. So what's fascinating about this for me is we have been using this exact same technology to understand the origins of mankind by looking at the variations in their genes over centuries, okay, if not millennia. So this is the same technology we're using. So Dennis referred to the binoculars and the telescope. Up until about 4 years ago, we were looking at little commercial Y-DNA tests you would buy from Family Tree DNA for $56, and they would look at 37 locations. Now we're looking at 7 million locations on the male Y chromosome. That is, that every man carries and passes on almost identically to his son. So we have moved far, far ahead. And so the question I had was, how can we use this technology, just like we're using this technology, how can we do what they're doing here? In this slide, this is the slide I showed you before was the variations. This is a map showing the migrations of the COVID virus over the last 12 months. And you can see they've been able to track by looking at the variations and where they're finding it, how the virus is moving, right? You see it coming out of China to Europe. You see it, a new variation coming out of Europe, finding its way to South America, right? And we find the Chinese variation coming to the United States. So we can see how this variation has moved around the world. And so what we've been trying to do is not because of virus, because we started this project several years ago, but we're using the exact same concept. How can we use this technology to learn something about the origins of every single one of us, all right? How can we make it personal? We know the history books, right? We read Wanderings as kids, and we read all the books that have come since then. And but what can we do now to use this new technology to learn something about ourselves? So, you know, if you want to learn something, go find yourself a teacher. Isn't that the old rabbinic saw? And the man who is the godfather of Jewish genetics is a man named Karl Skoretsky at the Technion in Haifa. And he, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, did a study that where he thinks he discovered the origins of the Kohanim. Okay. And we're rewriting his article now because we've learned a lot more. He was using binoculars. Now we're using a telescope. But I first went to him, and together we conceived of putting together a team. This fellow up here in the upper left-hand corner is Harry Oster. He's the leading expert on Jewish genetic diseases in the world. And we picked up archaeologists and biostatisticians. This is a small cluster of the people on the team. We put together a proposal. We got ethical approvals from 3 universities, NYU, Technion, and University of Haifa. And we put together a team. Now, one of the things about DNA is it's very personal, okay? And some stranger walking up to you and saying, gee, I'd like to get your genetic test is a pretty cheeky thing to do. And so we felt that if we were going to be talking to communities around the world, that we needed to have shlichim, okay? We needed to have representatives to speak for us in their communities. And so we found that Ashkenazim, well, such as ourselves, had been doing DNA testing for many years, right? We all know about Ancestry and Family Tree DNA and 23andMe, but the communities in the outside world were not that familiar with it. So we have community leaders from Curacao to test the families there, and in this picture here, you have virtually every Jewish community in the world represented: Greece, Turkey, China. The Bukhari community, the communities of Macedonia and Portugal, England, everywhere, North Africa. And so, but the point was you need to have people who represent you. We have over 50 shlichim today representing this project all over the world. Here's where we're testing. Okay, we're testing everywhere you could think of. You could find a Jewish community. And don't forget, Jewish communities are not always where you want to find them. If you want to test an Aleppo Jew, you go to New York, Brooklyn. If you want to test an Afghani Jew, you go to Flushing. If you want to test a Moroccan, you go to Paris, or a Tunisian, you go to Paris. So these are the communities we're testing, and the areas where we're testing don't always necessarily match up with where they are, because of course, many of these communities, particularly the Arab world, no longer exist. So we put together a package, we send out a package to people, they come back in the mail. It's a simple cheek swab. It takes about 2 minutes. This is our lab that we work with, based in Houston, Texas. Now, I want to discuss very briefly the DNA world. Okay, the universe of DNA you see advertised on television. So what you're seeing here is a family tree. Okay, any one of us, And you start at the bottom, you have a son and a daughter, and you have mom and dad, and you have grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. So these, everybody in between here, everybody in beige, okay, and dark brown, those are all the people who are tested by autosomal DNA. And that's the stuff you see advertised on TV. You know, I thought I was Swedish, but I'm actually Norwegian. You've all seen the ads. The problem with that form of DNA testing is it only works for first, second, third, fourth, tops fifth cousins. And it's not very good at even a fifth cousin level. So in terms of learning about your origins, it's not very effective. Finding out, looking for lost Holocaust family, if you're an adoptee and you're trying to find your birth family, if you're trying to identify a victim, okay? These are things for whom autosomal is superb. And I've seen it used to really remarkable discoveries in terms of linking Holocaust families that all thought one another had disappeared after the war, and we were able to reunite them. But again, it doesn't do the job for us. It doesn't go back far enough. To the right, we have mitochondrial DNA, which is a very slow ticking clock, not very effective for us. It's, you know, this is like Goldilocks, too soft, too hard. Off to the left, we have a family, we have DNA inherited from father to son, father to son. That's the Y DNA. That is just right. We have 7 million locations. We have a specificity of 80 to 120 years. Okay, we can really fine tune where people lived, when they lived, using this big Y technology, this new technology. Now, I just want to discuss with you how we learn, you know, how do the variations work? So this could be a COVID virus, but in this case, we're looking at a human being. Here is a man who has 2 sons. This son has a variation. This son does not. For the rest of all time, we'll be able to distinguish the descendants of this son from the descendants of this son. And this happens about every 3 generations. So we can have a very finely tuned family tree of the Jewish people. And that's exactly what we're developing now. That's exactly what we're working on. We're trying to take you back from the paper trail. You know, most of us don't really go back much more than 1840. Jody Zucker is a world-class expert in paper genealogy. And I'm sure you all know Jody. And but we're now trying to go back beyond the paper trail. We're trying to go back into Jewish history. So these are the these are the chromosomes. The one off to the right is the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome doesn't do much. Its main job is to make you a male. Okay, if you have one, it turns you into a male. If you don't have one, you're a female. Okay, that's all it does. But that's 90% of what it does. We're interested in it because it never recombines with any other chromosome. So the Y chromosome that you inherited from your father, he inherited almost exactly from his father, from his father, from his father. If I go back about 2,000 years, maybe I have 15 differences out of 7 million for my ancestor who lived at the time of the Second Temple, which is a remark. 17 differences out of 7 million locations over 2,000 years. So we did this study. Okay, we did a study and we came up with a catalog of ancestry. And that ancestry fact, ancestry shows that there wasn't one Abraham of the Jewish people. There were at least 650 Abrahams of the Jewish people. Okay, there was an Abraham who represents the father of all of us. But people have been entering the Jewish population continuously until the rise of Christianity. Okay, and then of course now in our present times, we have a great deal of introgression of new Y chromosomes and new men into the Jewish community. But until Christian times, it was a regular feature of Jewish life, and we know all about it. Okay, the Bible sends us tremendous signals about this, and we know that the men of Shechem, right, who wanted to circumcise themselves and become part of the Jewish people, right? It didn't end well for them, but the story clearly demonstrates that if you were circumcised and you were accepted by your father-in-law, okay, and your wife's family, you were accepted by the Jewish community. There was no concept of formal conversion. There were no rabbis. This was a very personal thing, and you found yourself in Iberia, okay, 3,000 miles from the temple. You became part of the Jewish people. And so we have plenty of genetic evidence of this. It does come to a very sudden halt at the time of the rise of Christianity. We see very little in the way of new introgression into the Jewish community from about 500 AD until the present time. Okay, and so that's a very interesting fact. And there's some wonderful literature about the rise of Christianity, how there was no such thing as as Judaism as a religion, as distinct from a peoplehood. Okay, we were a people. We were the Judean people, and the ways of the Judean people was the temple in Jerusalem, was the kashrut, was Shabbat, okay, was Brit Milah. These were the ways of the Jewish people. It was Christianity, which wasn't a peoplehood religion. It was an ideological religion that just tried to distinguish themselves from us by becoming a multinational religion, and they created the notion of a Jewish religion as distinct from peoplehood, because they were trying, among the people they were trying to attract were, of course, right, the people of Judea. So we have found 600 Abrahams, 650 Abrahams. What's interesting about this is of these 650 Abrahams, only fewer than 100 are found in the Ashkenazi population. Okay, this graphic is a little bit out of date, but we have over 500 found in the non-Ashkenazi world. That is among the Mizrahim in the Middle East, among the Romaniot in Greek and Turkey, among the Mughrabi from North Africa, and the Western Sephardi who came to Portugal in 1492, who ended up in Amsterdam, London, Hamburg, okay, and the Caribbean. So actually the Ashkenazim, we may be the overwhelming numbers, okay, of the Jewish population worldwide, but in terms of our origins, we were little pishers in the Jewish world at the time we were founded, okay? It's just that we were immensely successful thanks to Charlemagne in France, and thanks to Casimir in Greece. The Jewish population went from maybe 1,000 after the Black Death to 10 million by 1900. Okay, so we were staggeringly successful in Europe. Okay, so when we talk about all the bad times and the things, the suffering we had, there were terrible times and there was tremendous suffering. But by and large, I first learned this from Max de Montt as a teenager when I read Jews, God, and History. He talks about this very point, which was, it wasn't all bad times. The Jews were immensely successful in Europe, okay, from 1400 to 1900. These were good times. And we see it in terms of our population. Okay, your population doesn't grow from 1,000 to 10 million without there being some degree of success in a particular community. So, but a point I wanted to make to you is that we Ashkenazim are just part of a much bigger Jewish world. Now, I want to show you what we're looking for. So this is a Weinstein family photograph taken probably around the early 1950s. I don't know if there are any Weinsteins left in Indianapolis from that family. But once upon a time, they were very active. Ben and Monty and Al and Musty. They were very active members of the Indianapolis community. But what I wanted to show you was, how does the Y chromosome that we're studying, how does it move? Well, here we have Sam in the front row, and the blue lines represent his sons. Okay, you got Musty, Ben, right, Al, and Mutti, and they all inherited his Y chromosome exactly. Okay, it's the Weinstein Y chromosome. And then Musty passed it on to his three sons. Here's Rick, Lee, and Phil. Okay, you get the idea? You can't pass it on through daughters. Daughters do not have a Y chromosome. Okay, but it does pass on through the son almost exactly. So what we're looking at, so if I wanted to test Sam, who did I test? I tested Rick, because I happen to be seeing Rick. So I didn't need to test, I couldn't test a daughter. I could have tested any of these boys, Lee or Phil, but Rick was close at hand. So that's who I tested. This is their tree. This is the Weinstein tree. They come from a lineage called EY6923. It doesn't sound very catchy, but if you take a look carefully at this tree, we go back to 350 AD. We're able to distinguish the branches. By the way, this is a much bigger tree. I'm just giving you a piece of it. But these are the modern lineages down here. You can see these. I can give you a whole description on this. This will take a half hour. But basically, we have been able to identify mutations and variations in the Y chromosome of men who descend from this Jewish ancestor probably goes back 3,000 years, but we only are able to trace him to 1650 AD. We find him in Greece and Libya, okay, a Mediterranean lineage back then, but we find him here is 1250 years before present. And we see we see three branches bursting into the scene. That's Charlemagne's time. Okay, Charlemagne's time. Down here we see an enormous amount of growth 500 years ago, just after the Black Death. That's Casimir's time. I'm going to put all these slides online so you'll be able to blow them up and look at them. We're seeing in the DNA the effects of Jewish demographic success in different parts of the world. And we can actually correlate your family's results or any family's results to where they were in the world at different times. Now, this is clearly an Ashkenazi family, because if they were not Ashkenazi, we wouldn't see this growth spurt in 750 AD. And we wouldn't see this growth spurt after 1400 AD, because the non-Ashkenazi populations of the Mediterranean and the Middle East never shared in that. Okay, and that's why the Ashkenazi populations are enormous today. Less so, of course, because of the tragedy of the Shoah, but we would be another 6 million more. But the Jewish communities of the Mediterranean and the Middle East were always under economic and religious pressure from the Muslims and the Christians of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and in North Africa, and in Spain, and in Iraq, Persia and Iraq. So you can tell a lineage in a heartbeat whether it's Ashkenazi or not. So that's the Weinstein one. Here is mine. Okay, so in the upper left-hand corner, this is my grandfather. This little boy is my father. Here's my father and me. And here's me and my son, Jacob, in the lower right-hand corner. We all have the men all have the same Y chromosome. So to learn about my grandfather, I could test my son or I could test myself. It's a very interesting lineage. This lineage, if you go back 1,500 years, had a non-Jewish man in England. Okay, we can tell this because everyone before 1,500 years ago was not Jewish, and they were in England for 3,000 years. So they were not Roman slaves, okay, in England. These were Englishmen. But what's interesting is around 500 AD, our lineage splits in half. And here we find them in the Azores, Portugal, and Brazil, okay? Splitting off from us 1,500 years ago. Everybody from this man 1,500 years ago down this chart is Jewish. One half of it is Sephardi, one half of it is Ashkenazi, meaning one half remained in Iberia after the founding of after Charlemagne. One half didn't take Charlemagne's offer, one half did take Charlemagne's offer. And here we see a big branching event around 750 AD. What big surprise? We see another branching event in 1400 AD. So what we're seeing here is a man who entered the Jewish population in late Roman times in Iberia. And this is not at all a surprise. We have of the 600 lineages we've studied, we have 25 men who were demonstrably of Iberian descent, who entered the Jewish population and are now either found in the Ashkenazi population or in the Sephardi population today. So that's the second, again. So the first one I showed you before was the Mediterranean population that found its Jewish population that found its way up into the Ashkenazi lands. This is a man who converted to Judaism, or there probably was no conversion process, but who joined the Jewish people likely by circumcising himself and following the 613 mitzvot and being accepted into his father's family. I mean, that was obviously the important thing. Here's another lineage. This is my great-grandfather, Pinchas Goldstein. And the Goldsteins were very active players in the synagogue and in the community. Particularly, this is Charlie Goldstein, whose son was Charlie Sachs, who was the photographer of the whole family. He used to have a photography shop down by the monument years ago. I don't know if the Sachs family still lives in Indianapolis or not. A different migration pattern. This family, without doubt whatsoever, was living along the Black Sea, and everybody back in time was Greek. Okay, this is a family that found its way into the Jewish population in early times along the Black Sea and probably entered the Ashkenazi population by going up the Danube. So I described to you how some Jews, right, came over with Charlemagne. Well, some Jews came from the east up the Danube. And I mentioned to you rivers are the way people traveled in those days. That's how they traveled. They went up the Danube. They went up the Rhone. Now, there is a tradition that the Jews went from Italy over through the Brenner Pass into southern Germany and France. We haven't found it yet. Okay, I'm sure it's there, but we haven't yet found it in the DNA, and we're looking for it. This is one more. There are the Fogels. Okay, there's Libby and David. This is all the Fogel brothers. This is another lineage, the lineage Q. Okay, the lineage Q comes from the Eastern Mediterranean, and we only find it among the Romanyot of Turkey and Greece, and we find it among Moroccans. Okay, it's almost non-existent in Europe except from among Jews. And here we go back. If you look back at this, it goes back 2,500 years. All its descendants for the last 2,500 years have been Jewish that we've found to date. So it goes back into temple times. I will mention to you, I don't have a slide for this. We have been updating the study of the Kohanim that Karl Skoretsky did 20 years ago. We have tested Kohanim from Afghanistan to Bukhara, to the Caucasus, to Syria, Yemen, Morocco, and the Ashkenazim. And this is the largest group of Kohanim. They're all Kohanim. They all know they're Kohanim. Their common ancestor lived 2,800 years ago during the first temple. Okay, it's a remarkable study. We're going to publish it shortly. But we're finding that, again and again and again, we're finding confirmation of our traditions, but we're also finding things we didn't know before, which was how diverse our origins really are. Okay, now I'm going to discuss with you a very unusual lineage. This is the most unusual lineage we've ever found. It's a mystery. This lineage, without doubt, came from Spain. How it got to Spain, we haven't figured that out yet. But we're finding it among Ashkenazim in Eastern Europe. We're finding it among Sephardim who went from Spain to Portugal to Italy to Amsterdam. We're finding it in Tunisia. We're finding it in Morocco. It is totally a puzzlement, this lineage. We're finding it in South America, Central America. We're finding it among Jews in North America. It is a puzzlement, this lineage. But we do have one connection to this lineage, okay? One connection. We're finding it in Brava, Cape Verde Islands, Martha's Vineyard Island, San Miguel Azores. We're finding these descendants of this man. Honolulu, Hawaii. A guy was living in the Azores in the 19th century. He was picked up by a whale ship to go hunt whales in the Pacific, and he saw Hawaii, and he did what I would do, which is he got off. And he's living in Hawaii to this day, a former member of the Jewish people. Who's our connection? There you go. Rabbi Sasso is our connection. That is his family. And it is without a doubt, and in fact, it's so interesting that probably the leading Jewish cookbook writer in the world interviewed Rabbi Sasso last month to ask him about recipes. And she wrote an article about the Sasso recipes and the Korkos recipes and other Passover recipes of other members of the family who are all over the world, who have completely different traditions from one another. Yes, who have no knowledge of their common ancestry, carry different surnames. So the point being that if we can learn a great deal about our own families, about where our origins truly are, and where we've been during the last 3,200 years of Jewish history. And it's an amazing technology. And I encourage people who are at all interested in it to ask me questions and participate if they so wish. This is our website. I just want to put this in here before I lose you. Avotaynoonline.com is where we publish our stuff. And that's it. And I went over my 20 minutes. Rabbi, I apologize. I get so enthusiastic, I can't let go. So thank you all for your patience.
Thank you, Adam. That was fascinating. And, same thing happens to me when I'm giving a sermon. I get carried away, and then somebody comes in and picks me up and carries me away. But this was truly a journey of discovery for many of us. I've had the privilege of hearing the presentation before, but always am amazed at the work that you have been able to do and to be able to participate in it. I'm sure that people have questions that they would like to pose to you. Perhaps you already kind of hinted at it. Could you be a little bit more specific about if people wanted to participate in the project, how they can connect with you? There you are.
Well, the project we have is called the Avotaino Dna Project. Again, as the rabbi mentioned, it means our forefathers. Literally means our forefathers, actually means our foreparents, because in Hebrew, of course, when you use the singular, the plural masculine, you're referring to both males and females. Mm-hmm. This particular study happens to be a male study for the reason I described, which is that we're interested in looking back far back in history, and the Y chromosome among males seems to be the most useful tool for that. I want to mention one thing. First of all, that there's no genetic marker for being Jewish. Okay, I just want to lay that. I want to get rid of that one off the bat. Judaism is not a genetic matter. Okay, we're a people. And when a person becomes a member of the people, you're in. Okay, this is just simply how we've always worked from the beginning of our history. Abraham, nominated himself. Okay, in cahoots with God, he nominated himself to be the leader of our people. But ever since then, people have been joining in. Okay, and we know about Moshe marrying a Midianite woman. Okay, and we know constant stories. We know about Boaz and Ruth. I mean, there's hint after hint after hint, and not just about David and Solomon and all their wives. Hint after hint after hint that we embrace people who wish to join us. And the whole notion of study and wait 2 years and come ask me 3 times and I have to turn it down. This is nonsense. This has never been part of our way. Okay, our way was if you were sincere and you wish to join us, you're welcome to be among us. And I want to mention to you one other thing: the fact that so many men joined the Jewish people without formal conversion, raises some questions about patrilineal and matrilineal descent that have yet to be resolved. And that one of these days we're going to have to wrestle with that as to how that came about. There's plenty of evidence that patrilineal descent was even more important than matrilineal descent in temple times, and that it was something that the rabbis arrived at in Roman times to ensure the survival of the Jewish people. We went through a constriction in our population as a result of the Bar Kokhba revolt, in which men were slaughtered. Okay, it was like England in World War I. Men were slaughtered, and there weren't enough of us to repopulate our population. So there's some theory going around that the matrilineal descent was a response to that calamity and our inability to continue on the Jewish population. The origins don't matter. A significant segment of the Jewish population still adheres to patrilineal descent, so we have to deal with it. We have to have a conversation about it. Okay, we can't be enemies over these things. We have to find a way that we can all live together. And the point I think about history is that this is not necessarily part of our history throughout all times. It is a conversation that needs to happen, between those who follow the rabbinic tradition and those who look back further in time to a different tradition.
Thank you for mentioning that, Adam, because I think it's very important for Jews by choice to understand that they are fully in this stream of Jewish continuity, and that many new lines of Jewish identity have become part of that little rivulets that form a great stream.
And we're not doing this to identify people. We're doing this to illuminate Jewish history, right? The last 3,000 years of Jewish history. That's our goal.
Before I ask the first question posted, just to remind you also that by the time of the Exodus from Egypt, the biblical reference of Israel is that it was a mixed multitude, an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude left with the Israelites from Egypt. So we have always been that abundant crowd, and may we grow. Okay, here are some questions. There's a question about the involvement of Black Jews of Western South Africa in your work.
Okay, this is a very interesting point. we had to decide how we were going to approach this study initially. And we decided that the way to do that initially was to test and to focus on testing people from recognized Jewish communities for whom we had a strong archival support for their long-standing participation in Jewish life. So, for example, we know about the Ashkenazim, we know about the Jews of Greece and Turkey, and Morocco. We have no archival evidence of many Jewish communities around the world. In Nigeria, there are communities that claim Jewish ancestry. There's the Lemba of East Africa who claim Jewish ancestry. We don't have the resources to test every community on earth that has that tradition. So what we decided to do is we would establish a cohort of people we know to come from Jewish background that we could use, that others could use to compare those communities. We don't have the ability to go to Nigeria to test people or to go to Southwest Africa to test people, but there are plenty of people of scientists who have an interest in those communities. And so our objective was to test our known community and use that as a vehicle against which other people could test and see whether they have some evidence of Jewish ancestry. So I think that answers that question.
Same person who is a relative of yours, Greg Silver, is asking, do we have Neanderthal DNA?
Absolutely.
Are Neanderthals Ashkenazim or Sephardim?
Both.
Good.
They're not African, though. You don't find Neanderthal genes in Africa. You only find it in the populations which had some degree of contact with Europe and the hills of Haifa, right? We have Neanderthal caves we found in Israel. So that's between 2 to 4% Neanderthal throughout Europe and Asian populations.
Yep. Jim Borman is asking, I have done DNA testing through family tree DNA. My Y paternal DNA is RM198. Are these similar codes used in the research that is done through your project, Avotaynu?
Yes, and that's the R. I have a question, and he can chat back. Are you a Levite?
Jim, are you a Levite?
You have to go down to see the response.
No answer yet.
Well, we'll let him answer.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
RM198 represents 50% of all the Levites in Europe. The Horowitz family, the Epstein family, a lot of
Jim wants to know if committing to be a Levite will require him to attend services more often.
Yes.
Okay, there you are. Yes, on one side, he's a Levite.
Okay. Well, the RM198 is a marker for Ashkenazi Levites. So yes, it's a very well-known marker.
Interesting.
And it entered the Ashkenazi population at the very beginning, around 800 AD. Before 800 AD, we don't know anything about it, but it's definitely one of ours. And by the way, if you've been tested at Family Tree DNA, there's a link I did not put here. I would be very honored if you would participate in our project by going to jewishdna.org, jewishdna.org. And that is our portal at Family Tree DNA. And if you log in there and press join, it will put you into our project. Okay. And then you send me an email and I'll tell you what your results mean. So, but Family Tree DNA is the lab we work with.
Great. Jim Sherman, Roberta and Jim Sherman are asking if you have any information about the Ethiopian Jewish community.
We're just starting to test the Ethiopian Jewish community. It does not appear that their links are recent, but I will tell you uncontrovertibly they're Jewish. But it appears they came from a different population pool than the Ashkenazim or the Sephardim we've tested so far. Their closest connections are through actually Yemen, because there was a tremendous amount of migration from Yemen to Eritrea and Ethiopia in past times.
What about the Jews of India?
There's different communities in India. The Jews of Cochin, we have evidence, most certain evidence Jewish ancestry, and we see hints of it among the B'nai Menashe as well. But it's a complicated story because, like the Chinese Jews, and we've tested the Chinese Jews, some of the lineages clearly connect the Jews of Kaifeng to the Jews of Central Asia 1,000 years ago. And there's no question about it. We now have a very good idea where the Jews of China came from. But just like the Jews of China and the Jews of India, there has been intermarriage with Indians. So while we will see indicia of Jewish ancestry, we will often find Indian Y chromosomes because Indian men marry Jewish women over 1,000 years. Things happen.
There is a collection of beautiful manuscripts of the Chinese Jewish community in the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And that literature, which is significantly genealogical, I don't know if you've had occasion to look at that, indicates the intermarriages. And you can tell often by the names, the more Judaic names of some people, and then the typically non-Judaic Chinese names of spouses.
We have an article ready to go on this.
Oh, great.
We can't touch it because the Jewish community of China is under enormous stress right now, and we've decided that we just didn't want to get into a conversation about their genetics that distinguishes them from the Chinese as a group. But the Shi and Li families are unmistakably Jewish from Kaifeng.
There's a question from Miles Siegel. Have you looked at the DNA of the Samaritans? What have you found?
Unfortunately, there are only 4 Samaritan Y chromosomes left. So one of the features of populations is that over time, men daughter out and a Y chromosome becomes lost. So I'll give you an example. My grandfather was one of 6 siblings, 5 sisters and he. And my grandfather had Molly, my aunt, and my father. If my father had been a girl, it would have been the end of the line for that family. And statistically speaking, this happens all the time. And it happens in the majority of cases. So the Y chromosomes we see today. So when I mentioned to you that there are 650 surviving Y chromosomes that we found so far, and we haven't even started in Yemen yet, okay? In Morocco, for every man we test in Morocco, we find a different Abraham. Okay? Every other one, we find a different Abraham. So we tested 150 people in Morocco. In the last 6 months, we found 75 new Abrahams. Okay? Wow. And virtually none of them are Berber tribesmen. Okay, they all come from Jewish ancestry. So that is what happened to the Samaritans, a declining population plus just the effect of having daughters. There are only 4 Y chromosomes left. Yes, they're Jewish.
Great. I don't know if this question was asked before concerning the Y chromosome of blacks of South Africa and Egypt.
We don't find any connection to the Jewish population in the last couple of thousand years.
Barry Levitt is asking, my Y67 test was EM35, but the big Y test show EBY8542. I am a Levite. Can you ask?
I'm going to have to look that up. I will tell you that the Weinstein family of Indianapolis is an EM35, but EM35 lived in Paleolithic times, probably 20,000 years ago. And as we've done more advanced testing, we have been able to move further and further and further down the tree. And over time, what occurs is these mutations are given scientific names. So the name you are given now is the scientific name for your most recently identified variation. Okay, so when you started, you were EM35 because we really didn't know how to learn any more than that. But that man lived 20,000 years ago. So now you're probably down to within 300 or 400 years. And if you've done that Y67, I hope you will join the Jewish DNA Project, the Jewish DNA.org site, and log yourself in, and I'll be able to tell you which of the many EM35 lineages you come from. We probably 20% of the Jewish population, of the Jewish variations, come from EM35 who lived 20,000 years ago. So we need more data.
And a question concerning the New Mexico conversos in New Spain regarding their Y chromosomes.
Jewish.
Of course.
They're Jewish. In fact, there's I didn't show you this slide. Not all of them. I mean, first, well, let me say something. We can look at the autosomal DNA and we can look at the Y chromosome. When we find a Y chromosome link, it's very rare that we're going to find it continuous father, son, father, son, father, son for 500 years. Just as I mentioned to you, what happened in India, what happened in China, the same thing happened in Nuevo León, in Monterrey, Mexico, and in Colorado in the San Luis Valley. There was marriage, occasional breaks in the male line. We do find some converso descendants in Mexico and Colorado who demonstrably had Jewish ancestors. There's no question about it. And one of the things we're working on right now is I was approached by the University of Colorado that they had a disease, a really horrible disease of the skin, of a collagen deficiency, and they asked us if I could figure out what the origins were of that disease. And they sent me a sample. I had no idea who they were. They sent me the samples. We matched them against our cohort of 1 million people, and they were like two bullseyes on Monterrey, Mexico, and the San Luis Valley of Colorado, which are known to have been settled in the 17th century by conversos seeking to avoid the Inquisition. And one of the features is that to avoid the Inquisition, they married their cousins, okay? Because they couldn't trust anyone else. The only people they married outside Judaism is they married Native American women, okay? Because the Native American women were under the same pressure from the friars as the Jews were, and it became the obligation of the mother-in-law to teach her Native American daughter-in-law, the ways of her people. And I have some really fantastic stories when I've done DNA testing down there. That some of them one of them is a shaggy dog story that'll take me 10 minutes alone to tell. But the long short is, I have no doubt that these stories all have a grain of truth in them because we see the diseases. Now, this last study, which was just submitted this week to the British Journal of Dermatology, is going to, I think, clearly demonstrate the effect of endogamy. One of the aspects of recessive diseases is they depend upon cousin marriage, right? So Tay-Sachs, for example, right? Familial dysautonomia, Gaucher's disease. We know about these. These are functions of endogamy. If we weren't marrying our cousins all these years, they would be lost to history. And the reason why RDEB is still showing up after 500 years is because these converso Jews have held fast to their heritage. They didn't practice Judaism, but they practiced endogamy. I want to mention one other thing. As I was in Portugal 2 years ago, and I tested 10 men from the community of Belmonte, which was rediscovered in the 1920s. And they thought they were the only Jews left on earth, the Jews of Belmonte. And they were unsuccessfully reintegrated into the Jewish worldwide population, but they continue to hold on to their traditions, which are different than ours, but spiritually exceptionally meaningful. We tested 10 of them, and 4 of them, 6 of them we haven't decided yet, 4 of them are demonstrably Jewish, okay? So consider that for a minute. People living in a small village in the Raya, the mountainous region between Spain and Iberia, who for 500 years there's been a continuous father-son, father-son, father-son Jewish relationship. And we're finding connections to the Belmonte Jews among all throughout the Mediterranean and even in some of the Ashkenazi countries. So,
Sandy and I spent some time with the Jews of New Mexico during our sabbatical, and everything that you were saying was very evident in their practice, a combination of great pride in their Jewish ancestry, but also of secrecy and insecurity, and then that kind of endogamy and attachment to the region where they lived. And unfortunately, those who have sought to reconvert have not always been well received by the neighboring communities. So one of the lessons of this work that you are doing is that we as Jews need to be much more open and embracing of people who either claim Jewish ancestry or would like to join themselves to the Jewish continuum.
they have a lot to teach us, okay? You know, as we sort of become Americanized and we sort of forget how special it is. It's amazing how they're fully aware of how special it is. One other point is that people don't realize is that the Inquisition continued in Mexico until 1826, which is
That's the story of my family.
Yes.
There were hiatuses of time where members of the Spanish Portuguese Jewish community lived as non-Jews and integrated, and there are lines that just went out of the Jewish continuum, but not genetically so, as you have pointed out.
Can I ask a quick question? So is somebody doing what you're doing with the maternal line, or is that not possible?
We're actually doing something with the maternal line. We have been working with a number of universities in Israel to look at the maternal DNA of the skeletons they found on digs, 3,000-year-old digs in the Bekaa Valley, which is in Jordan, and in Hazor, right in northern Israel, Yigal Yadin dug in Hazor, and also in Megiddo, right? So we've been working on that. One of the useful things about mitochondrial is that it's very persistent. There's only about 16,000 locations. Remember I mentioned there were 7 million locations on the Y? The mitochondria only has 16,000. So it's much more likely to be preserved in a meaningful way. Plus it's more easily reconnected when there are snippets of it found in different locations in a bone. We can reconnect more easily than we can. So we are looking at the mitochondrial DNA. One of the most interesting things about the mitochondrial DNA that we have found is that among the Ashkenazim, there's much greater diversity in the Y chromosome than there is in the mitochondrial DNA. So what the speculation is that when all the Mediterranean men found their way up into no man's land, in pagan land, that they married local women in the earliest generations, and that these women became the seed for future generations of women who were demonstrably Jewish who men married. So we can tell from mitochondrial DNA quite quickly whether a maternal lineage comes from a Jewish ancestry or not. It's quite apparent. We don't have the specificity of the Y chromosome. We can't measure, within an 80 to 100 year degree of measurement. We can't do it that finely. We can't say this happened in this year or this happened in this generation, because when you have only 16,000 markers, they don't mutate as frequently as a section of the chromosome that's got 7 million markers. That being said, it's exceptionally useful, and there is demonstrable mitochondrial Jewish DNA, just like there is Y chromosome DNA.
Adam, thank you for the seeds of knowledge and of curiosity that you have planted with us tonight. And hopefully, as the work of the Avotaino Dna Project continues, you'll be able to come back, hopefully in person next year, and give us an update. This is your congregation. We are your family, and we are delighted you have connected us with the universal Jewish family tonight. So I'm going to invite anybody who would like to hang around for a little bit longer online, say hi to Adam if you are connected, and to thank once again all of you for joining us, and wishing you all health and joys in the months ahead, as hopefully little by little we get back to a new normal. Thank you all, and we'll see you for future programs. You can hang on for a little bit, say hi to Adam, and if you are related, raise your hand and identify yourself.
But thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it, and I'm sorry it's such a dry topic, but it'll grow in you as you let it roll around in your head. It'll start to grow in you. I want to mention to you also that on Avotaynu Online on the website, I have a post called Lecture Notes. And in there, you'll find a longer lecture if you need to hear it a second time, because there's something you didn't quite grasp. Or I also have a book list of books on Jewish history that I recommend. There's some really fantastic books out there that I think very highly of. And this
was the nucleus of your presentation, and we can explore the protoplasm online.
Yes, and people are also welcome to contact me with questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Say hello and stay healthy, stay happy.
I see my cousin. I see our cousin Andy from, and there's Marty.
Yeah, gotcha.
How are you, Marty?
I'm good. Long time no see. I was wondering, has anything ever occurred with the disease of von Hippel-Lindau? Is that something that you've ever discovered or heard about in your Jewish studies?
I haven't. I'm sure if I had Harry Oster on this call, he would give you chapter and verse on it.
Harry Oscar?
Harry Osterer, O-S-T-R-E-R. He is my colleague, and I'm sure his book is in the library. He wrote a book on Jewish genetic history. It's a bit out of date. It was about a decade ago, but it's still he's the go-to guy. We're now discovering more. Hi, Pearl.
Hey,
We're discovering more genetic diseases constantly now because we now have the ability to do whole